to welcome Professor Jeffrey Sachs and our distinguished panelists connecting online, Dr. Maha Yahya and Dr. Ziad Bahauddin. Let me obviously start with our keynote speaker, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. It gives us really a lot of great pleasure really to have you with us, even if from a distance. I know that you were on a trip to Latin America perhaps, but you were able to find the time to be with us. We are very grateful for that. It would be very easy to present or to introduce Jeff through the official bios, but I think this would not do justice to him. I have known Jeff since some 20 years, and my first experience with him, just to give you an idea about how visionary and pioneering this social thinker and thought leader, we did a book at the World Bank, and I was the task manager, and the title of the book was "Can Africa Claim the 21st Century?" That was in 2000. And we visited Jeff and presented the book at that time at Harvard, HIID. And I was very impressed by, of course, several comments, but particularly he welcomed the initiative that to write something, authoritative about Africa as a major development challenge. But he said that the World Bank needs to develop competency in science. And the reason for that is because African agriculture did not benefit from the Green Revolution. And also the burden of disease is particularly harsh in sub-Saharan Africa. Right now we are talking about science. We are talking about that we shouldn't confine ourselves to economic reforms. And then, of course, the list goes. The end of poverty and his contribution to the poverty agenda, the SDGs, the climate issues, and before that, the debt crisis, and so on. So we are really having a thought leader who is committed to multilateralism in economic development, in debt relief, in climate change. And he also has the intellectual honesty and courage to tackle very difficult issues, such as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And his unwavering commitment for justice is really an inspiration for all of us. So without further ado, without talking about Jeffrey Sachs as the former director of the Earth Institute, a university professor and professor at Harvard, and his role as at the UN and all that, I think that would be enough for us to introduce Jeff, and I can speak more, but for the interest of time, the floor is yours, Jeff.
Ibrahim, thank you so much. How wonderful to be with all of you, and happy birthday to ERF. This is a great celebration of 30 years, and all of your leadership, Ibrahim. Thank you for the warm words as well. I wish we were meeting in better circumstances worldwide, but in fact, we're at an extraordinarily dangerous and destructive time. I see no leadership coming from the United States whatsoever, only war and warmongering, a president who is far too old and far too irresponsible to be president, a leading candidate to replace him who is psychologically unstable and dangerous, and wars raging in Ukraine, in Gaza, and of course, at any moment, possibly in the wider Middle East, disaster in Sudan, and incredible tensions between the United States and China that could easily spill over to war as well. We're in the most dangerous geopolitical environment since World War II, and the quality of leadership, especially of U.S. leadership, is the worst that I've seen in decades, and it's bipartisan. Neither party offers any ideas that are constructive. What is happening is that the United States is in relative decline because mainly of the rise of China, not only because of the rise of China, but because of the rise of China, the relative rise of India and East Asia, and the U.S. Is in a very nasty mood, attempting to maintain its hegemony, which is a wrong idea and a futile idea, but it is provoking defensive reactions everywhere. I'm very mad at yesterday's vote in the U.S. Congress for another $95 billion of aid. The American public was against this. There was no coherent debate. This is the military-industrial complex speaking in this aggressive defensive mode of American hegemony. So I wish that our circumstances were better. Right now, given these realities. I was asked to speak about the Palestine-Israel crisis, and so I'll focus some remarks on this. There was a glimmer of good news last week, and that is that after 13 years since Palestine's application to be a UN member state, which was made in 2011, the issue was revived by the Palestinian Authority and brought back to the UN Security Council last week. And as all of you know, the vote expressed the overwhelming view of the world community that Palestine needs to be a sovereign, independent nation with the membership in the United Nations by a vote of 12 in favor in the Security Council, 2 abstentions, and 1 veto, of course, the United States, which is the most retrograde and reactionary force in the world today, the one that opposes all change because all change means a loss of US power in one way or another. So it's not a bad outcome, actually. Even the UK, which I regard as even more militaristic in mindset than the US, if that's possible, although the UK has very little power anymore, but it still has more militarism than the US. Even the UK abstained, whereas the US vetoed. So this is actually, in a way, a positive development. It didn't achieve the outcome of membership of Palestine as the 194th UN member state, but it showed where the will of the global community is. This action now will almost surely go to the UN General Assembly, and that will also be an important and positive step, in my view. Of course, the United States doesn't have a veto in the UN General Assembly, but at the same time, a vote by the UN General Assembly is not binding on the actions of the United Nations, only advisory in this case. But what will happen is that Palestine already has diplomatic relations with 140 countries. And now the issue of Palestine's membership in the UN will come to the General Assembly because of the veto by the United States. And my fervent hope, and I hope that all of us work on it in every way in the next couple of weeks if this actually comes to pass, is that the vote will be at least 160, if not 170 plus members of the United Nations declaring for Palestine to become the 194th UN member state. So if that happens, not only would that show the overwhelming will of the world community, but it would also put the issue back to the UN Security Council. I want to isolate the United States on this issue as much as possible, because the more that the American leaders and strategists come to understand that the whole world favors Palestine as a sovereign nation now and a UN member state now, and as soon as this strategic, so-called strategic group in Washington, our deep state, understands that the American people are also siding with Palestine against Israel's slaughter, this will be the lever ultimately to change the positions of the US security state and break this terrible deadlock. We are not there yet. There's still a tremendous amount of politics ahead. When I speak about my own country, we are a democracy in name, but not in substance, because the will of the American people counts for almost nothing in terms of America's actions in the world. The American actions in the world are led by a small group in Washington. The famous military-industrial complex is real. It's not a myth. It involves the arms industries, the 5 big military contractors who have hundreds of billions of dollars of military contracts each year. Of course, the CIA, the relevant armed services committees in the Congress that receive huge campaign donations from the military-industrial complex, and most of the East Coast institutions of the United States, including the one that I teach at Columbia University, Harvard University, Johns Hopkins, and so forth, heavily funded by the military-industrial complex and often quite subservient to it. Our students at Columbia University were arrested on Friday for a peaceful demonstration in favor of Palestine. I have not seen anything like that during my career, but the US security state is in an aggressive, defensive mode. The pressures on the university administrators to crack down on pro-Palestinian students is very high. And when these students came out in a peaceful protest, within hours, the New York Police Department was putting them into vans and arresting them. 100 students were arrested and were summarily expelled from school. This is not so unusual in many places in the world, but it's unusual in the United States, and it shows the nasty mood and the very aggressive environment that we're operating in right now. So what do I believe should happen with the Israel-Palestine situation? In my view, the only path to peace that is feasible is two states, both sovereign, both members of the UN Security Council, on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967, with Palestine having its capital in East Jerusalem, and with control of the Islamic holy sites. That, to my mind, is the settlement. In that settlement, by the way, I believe that the millions of Palestinian refugees and their descendants would have a homeland in Palestine, not in Israel. So I do not believe that that settlement is compatible with the right of return, because I think that the only peaceful settlement possible is two states living side by side and not even agreeing to that, by the way, having the world community impose that solution. My experience over half a century is that it is impossible for this outcome to arise by negotiations between Palestine and Israel. The two sides hate each other, and that hate has grown for understandable reasons, in my view, over the last 50 years, especially because Israel has been absolutely, and the US as backer, has been opposed to Palestinian political self-determination. And at this point, I don't see any possibility of direct negotiations between Israel and Palestine to bring an end to this crisis. So I am hoping that the UN Security Council, if we had even a modicum of sense and decency in the United States, would create the conditions for a sovereign state of Palestine on the 4th of June, 1967 borders, and make sure that both states are secure. They don't have to like each other. They won't like each other for at least another generation, if not longer, but they can live in peace, in mutual security, and Palestine can go about its business peacefully. The alternative, unfortunately, is continued war, and the hold of the Israel lobby on US politics remains so strong, despite the view of the American people that Israel is absolutely in the wrong and operating illegally and in an unacceptable, bloody manner. The political system in the United States is relatively impervious to the public opinion. It is going to continue to provide munitions for Israel to continue its slaughter until there is a political settlement. And so I'm looking for something very practical, very pragmatic, in which the world community can agree and essentially impose an answer on the two sides. And the answer, it seems to me, is clear, basic, in line with decades of UN Security Council resolutions. It would make clear that all of Israel's actions beyond the 4th of June, 1967 borders, after the 1967 war, have been illegal, but Israel should have known that. All the settlements and all the actions taken, in my view, were known to be illegal as of Resolution 242 in late 1967. So Israel has taken cynically for 57 years actions that it has known are illegal because it thought that power would be enough to, and facts on the ground, as the Israelis love to say, would be enough to secure these rights in the long term. I think we can end this impunity, or we're close to it. 12-1 to 2 abstentions is pretty close. There'll be an even more lopsided vote in the UN General Assembly, and then there will be a further showdown. I would like these votes also to make clear that there is no other path to peace between the two states other than the two-state solution. Of course, both sides dream of one state. The Palestinians dream of a state without Israel. The Israelis dream of a state without Palestine. I think both of those are recipes for ongoing war, chaos, and potentially enlargement to World War III. Now, I'll just say that from my own discussions with diplomats, senior diplomats all over the Middle East and all over the world in recent months, I believe that the two-state approach actually is viable. Again, the only three opponents of it in the world are the Israelis, who want Greater Israel, the Palestinians, who want one state, and the United States, which backs Israel pretty much unconditionally. Other than that, I don't see any party in the world that really objects to peace and mutual security based on the two-state solution. Even Iran, I do not see as a spoiler in this at all, personally. I believe that Iran would sign on to peace and that all parties in the region, in the Gulf, Iran, and any others would sign on to a two-state solution on the terms that I've stated: boundaries of 4th of June, 1967, control of the Islamic holy sites, capital in East Jerusalem, and would agree under those circumstances to Israel's security as well as to Palestine's security, and would agree to end the resistance forces, to demilitarize them or disband them, or stop funding and arming them as part of a solution. For whatever it's worth, of course, I get hate mail from Israel every day. How can I say these things? And I answer that I believe that Israel could be secure with a two-state solution, and only with a two-state solution. The mentality that I hear both from academics and from the general public in Israel is no, every Hamas fighter needs to be killed before we're going to be safe. Of course, this is an insane, delusional approach to the situation, but it is a very widespread view. And I would like, and I'm trying to do everything I can to show that diplomacy could actually work, and that even so-called rejectionist states like Iran are not so rejectionist. What they reject is a solution that is all in the US and Israeli occupying force favor. Nobody accepts that or should accept that. But if the compromise is real and sensible and in line with the will of the international community, my own view is that everybody would accept this, other than the two belligerents themselves, who yearn for complete solutions on their favor and complete security as they see it. And I believe that those ideas are impossible, delusional, and would condemn us to endless conflict. Let me just end by saying that I believe that it is urgent that we reach this practical solution very soon, because the world, as I started, is so unstable now, and the foolishness of the U.S. leadership is so extreme, and the lack of understanding and care about the rest of the world in the U.S. leadership is so extreme that we really, really could end up in a global and then nuclear war. We're not far from it. We are not in stable hands. We are not with the good judgment anywhere. We are not with any leadership in the U.S. that understands this. All the U.S. leadership understands right now is power and the attempt to maintain U.S. hegemony. They're not going to give it up lightly. And it's very important, therefore, that we find peace in the Middle East and peace in Ukraine and peace in East Asia before we blow ourselves up. How does one deal with an obstreperous, immature, and violent U.S. leadership in this context? In my view, the answer is twofold. One is, of course, inside the United States, we need to speak up for peace. Even if students are getting arrested, it's unbelievable. But we need to speak up for peace inside the U.S. But when it comes to the international side, we need a strong worldwide desire for peace, not with siding with one military alliance or another. We need a worldwide movement for peace that expresses the urgency of ending these conflicts in a fair and just way, and telling the major powers, we don't want a global war and global destruction. And so I think the voices of all countries in the world are extraordinarily important right now, and we need to show that there is a worldwide call for peace as our most urgent matter. So thank you for letting me share quick thoughts with you, and I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We are now going to invite our distinguished panelists to give us their commentaries. Dr. Maha Yahya is Director of Malcolm H. Carnegie Middle East Center, where her work focuses broadly on political violence and identity politics, pluralism, development, and social justice after the Arab Springs, the challenges of citizenship, and the political and socio-economic implications of the migration refugees crisis. So Dr. Maha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brahim. Can everyone hear me? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Brahim, and thank you, ERF, for the invitation to join you. Unfortunately, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be with you in person in Morocco. I'm going to pick up where Jeff left off, sort of, and that is that this is one of the most dangerous geopolitical moments in decades, and the only way out of it is not military, it's a diplomatic solution. He spoke about the lack of leadership in the US. I would go further and say there's no real leadership visible, not just in the United States, but also across this region. Whether we're talking about Israel, within Palestine, but also amongst the broader Arab regional public. And I think that has been one key challenge in terms of how do we address this. And I'll speak a bit more about this as I move forward. I wanted to begin with where are we today? What is the economic and humanitarian cost of this conflict until now for the people of Palestine? Right now, we're looking at 35,000 people killed in Gaza. The estimates are another 10 to 15,000 who are under the rubble. More than 80% of Gaza has been destroyed. 17,000 children have been orphaned. More than 70,000 people have been injured, and it's estimated that many of them will unfortunately pass away because of their injuries and the lack of healthcare. The entire healthcare infrastructure, educational infrastructure, completely devastated in Gaza and need to go into the atrocities. And now we're facing famine. These figures are not just figures, these are lives and people. And the situation is beyond catastrophic. Just to recover from the insult, if the conflict was to start now in Gaza, it would take at least a year and a half to just clean up the rubble and to recover the dead and injured who are lying underneath the rubble. That is without even talking about the process of rebuilding, reconstructing, not just the physical space and place. All right, let me continue. So these are the numbers I quoted are not just lives, are not just numbers. These are lives that have been lost and that will continue to suffer. The trauma is of a scale that we have not seen before, and it's going to be with us for generations. The devastation that we're seeing in Gaza today is having an impact, obviously, across the region, broadly speaking. Before I get into the impact of that devastation and what it means, I also want to do a quick recap on where we are today. We've seen the Israeli-Iranian exchange over the past 2 weeks, the April 1st targeting of the Iranian consulate in Damascus, Iran's retaliation on April 13th, a kind of light show, but that also, brought out the shadow war between Israel and Iran into the light, and then Israel's response. Frankly, we're really treading on dangerous grounds. And while this round may have now quietened, I mean, I think we can say that at least this round is now over. New ground has been broken with the two countries targeting each other directly and not through proxies or through cyber conflict or covert operations. Meanwhile, the polarization is increasing tremendously across the region. When I talk about the trauma that has been inflicted on generations of Palestinians, when we speak about 17,000 children who have been orphaned, who have no surviving family members left, this is a trauma that will take decades and generations to overcome. But this is also impacting the region far, far beyond. The levels of anger and disconnect within the broad Arab communities, both in the region, but I would say far beyond the region, Arab, Muslim, non-Western, in the non-Western sphere is considerable. And we're seeing this across the board in many of the polls that are emerging. Just to give one indication, support in Saudi Arabia, where the government has spent significant energy over the past few years acclimatizing its own population to the prospect of normalizing with Israel, support there has gone down. The opposition to normalization has gone up from 38% to 68%. And amongst Palestinians themselves, we're seeing a significant increase in support, not only for Hamas and the West Bank, it's more than triple in 3 months. This is according to a survey, and this is back in November, conducted by the Palestinian Center for Studies and Policy Research. The survey itself showed how much greater the support for Hamas is. But even if we were to take this as a temporary measure, i.e. support usually increases immediately or in the aftermath of war and then returns to previous levels several months later, what we're seeing is, and this is for me, the more worrying trend, is support for armed struggle. It's within 3 months, it increased to more than 60%, saying that armed struggle is the best way for ending Israeli occupation in the West Bank. And the majority of people in the West Bank believe that the formation of armed groups and communities that are subject to settler attacks is the most effective means for combating what they call settler terrorism against towns and villages in the West Bank. Obviously, this is not happening simply in reaction to what we're seeing in Gaza, but is happening in reaction to the significant increase in violence by settlers in the West Bank, supported by the IDF. And I mean, 2023 was probably the bloodiest year until recent history when it came to Palestinians living in the West Bank. In the last 6 months, we've seen major pogroms. 3 communities have been completely uprooted. These are based on data that's coming out of Israeli and Palestinian NGOs who have been monitoring these issues. What's also very worrisome, is that the vast majority, almost 70%, think that the recent talks about two-state solution in the US and other Western countries is simply not serious. Even the support for two-state solutions amongst Palestinians, at least 65% believe that it's no longer practical due to settlement expansion. And 66% believe that the establishment of an independent Palestinian state along Israel in the next 5 years are slim to non-existent. What's also quite concerning is the percentage of populations that support unarmed popular resistance has gone down considerably. Now, the reason why I'm quoting these figures is just to indicate the extent to which positions are hardening in a very, very significant, not surprisingly, obviously, given the levels of violence and the carnage that is happening in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. But also this hardening of positions is also happening because of the way Palestinians are being systematically dehumanized, particularly in Western media. And I think Jeff spoke to some of this, so I will not repeat it. At the same time, on the Israeli side, there's also a hardening of positions. The shock of the October 7th attack is still with Israeli society. It was considerable. It shattered any sense of security that was prevalent at the time. And what's concerning is that when all the polls until now have indicated that the majority of Palestinians still believe that the response to Gaza is still not enough, or there could be more, and that denying humanitarian aid to Gaza is okay. This was a poll in January where 72% said it's okay. So I won't quote more and more figures, but for us to move out of this not only deadlock around the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and to address the intergenerational trauma that we're facing, the first step obviously is a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire that we have been calling for along with people across the world from day one. And however, today it's not enough to have a ceasefire in Gaza, but a region-wide de-escalation framework. The concern is if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, then Bibi Netanyahu and his far-right government are likely then to turn towards Lebanon in an attempt to also trigger a broader conflict, political survival. I won't get into the details of the logic internally. I think the absolute imperative of the two-state solution, while I agree with Jeff on the absolute imperative for this, unfortunately, I'm one of those who believe that we've gone way beyond it. I think the possibility and the potential for a two-state solution today on the ground, unfortunately, is gone. There is there is between the areas that have been annexed by Israel, the Israeli government, the settlers, the West Bank, etc. Unless it's something that is imposed with a ready-made solution of how do you roll back, when Oslo was signed, you had 250,000 settlers in the West Bank. Today, there are more than 750,000. Today, the schism within Israel is not between a pro-peace and an anti-peace camp. It's between a pro-Netanyahu and an anti-Netanyahu camp. If Bibi Netanyahu was to resign tomorrow or be forced to resign, the alternative is Benny Gantz, whose political positions on a peaceful end to this are not really very far off from where Bibi Netanyahu is. So I think the imperative of having a two-state solution, here is where I agree with Jeff. There needs to be, if we're going to move in that direction, then there needs to be a lot more concerted effort by the international community and real pressure to make that happen. Otherwise, we are looking at either ethnic transfer or a one-state solution, a federation. This would be up to the negotiators to figure out. I think the third thing I would say is that there needs to be a rethinking at the region-wide level of what security really means. And this means an investment in people, but on the side of Iran, it also means a rollback on the network of proxies that it has built across the region. Now, this is a pipe dream at this particular moment because Iran sees them as its deterrence, its defense, its way of accomplishing its own imperial, power structure in the region. But when we look at where its proxies and partners lie, they lie mainly in countries that have been devastated by civil conflict and where the state has been considerably weakened, where the challenges are tremendous. We look at Lebanon, at Syria, at Iraq, at Yemen. So for me, a rethinking of a kind of a region-wide de-escalation, but also stabilization process means reinvesting in state systems, in governance systems, in institutions, and in people. That is not going to happen in a vacuum, and it's not going to happen on its own. Because embedded within this is how to address the devastation of the last decade, the kind of development programs that we need. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maha. Now I give the floor to Dr. Raja Khalidi. Raja is the Director General of the Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute, famously known as MAS, M-A-S. Dr. Khalidi was a research coordinator at MAS before becoming the Director General. He prepared and published numerous papers and reports on the economic situation and development policies in the occupied Palestinian territories and on the Arab economy in Israel. You have 10 minutes, Dr. Raja.
Tamam. Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. And of course, thank you to the ERF, with whom MAS shares its 30th anniversary this year. So we should do a joint birthday party, maybe. I will take the liberty of also introducing a personal anecdote about Jeffrey Sachs, just to remind him that we had the honor at UNCTAD to organize the 5th, 6th Raoul Prebisch Development Lecture 15 years ago, Professor Sachs. And as you say, he was then insistent, and we didn't know why, that he wanted to talk about climate change. So 15 years ago, as you will all recall, it was not a major issue in the way it is today. So that being said, I also want to thank him and Maha for making it easier for me to talk about economics rather than the politics. Coming from ground zero on day 199 of this genocide, I mean, we have tried to escape as economists into economics over the last 6 months. We've produced as much as we could about the economics of the war, but it's very hard to escape that reality. And what we hoped would indeed be a 3-month limited, with all the destruction it could have entailed, attack on Ghazi has now turned indeed not only into a regional war, but we now fear that the that the same strategies that we're seeing in Gaza will now be applied in the West Bank. So it's hard to talk about the economics or the economy of Palestine, to be honest, to a room full of economists. And hence I took the theme that you've put out there, the intergenerational disruptors, not really knowing, having thought of Palestine's economic history or current prospects in those terms before, and tried to put those thoughts into what I have to say. There are so many intergenerational disruptors over the century that have been pulling Palestine in different directions that neither does conventional economics provide an answer to what is happening and what has happened, nor is there really today a Palestinian economy, so to speak of. Hence the conventional policy tools that we are all accustomed to and have been trained in and apply fall flat or risk, in fact, exacerbating existing distortions. And that is basically because economists, Palestinian and policymakers, Palestinian and international, have thought best to escape from the politics of Palestine. In frustration at no solution being possible, or under often the mantle of economistic technical solutions, indeed guided by what the deceptive promise of peace building, maybe it should be the deceptions of peace building, and the peace dividend that we bought into, in fact, over the last 30 years. So just talking first about the disruptors of economic development. And this I put under the broad theme of settler colonialism versus national liberation. So the first major one, 1948, from the Arab-Jewish mandate dual economy of the British mandate economy, the dual Arab-Jewish economy, to the dispersion of the Palestinian people over 4 spaces, overnight, in a matter of months, as we are seeing today. Arab economy in Israel under military rule for the first 20 years, until 1966, and since an apartheid-like economic trajectory within the Israeli economy. The West Bank became, again, a backwater, effectively annexed to the Hashemite kingdom. The Gaza Strip was overwhelmed by a massive influx of refugees and under Egyptian military rule, and the Shatat diaspora between those impoverished in the camps and those who found occupational opportunities in the Arab Gulf, indeed played a major role in building those states. 1967, big shock. Reunification of historic Palestine under Israeli occupation, but a skewed relationship between the occupier and the occupied through extraction of resources, labor, and land, of course, for settlement. 1994, Oslo, Paris, and the promise of development and independence, and a promise which we are now 30 years down the road of. So that was when we started talking about a Palestinian national economy. In 1994, in fact, Yusuf Saigh first wrote about it in 1988. Because the Palestinians, before anybody in the world, were committed to the two-state solution. 2000, 2005, 6, the Second Intifada, separation of East Jerusalem from the West Bank, end to the promise of independence, while still promising development through reform and good governance. Nevertheless, an unprecedented Palestinian political and geographic division which today persists. Hence, there is no Palestinian national economy to speak of. There is one that we dream of, but not one that you can work policy on. There is not a coherent Palestinian economy. Rather, there are 5 regional economies, spinning in these different orbits around the Israeli national economy. So the current configuration, if anything, is closest in economic theoretical terms to an economic union. However skewed, uneven, and distorted, history has made that union, imposed union. Second set of disruptors are the disruptors of markets, which we all think about all the time. And this is all about, can again be summarized under the center-periphery dependency, simple, straightforward dependency theory. The Israeli colonial economy had and continues to have a series of growth prerequisites that change over time, from agriculture to light industry to heavy industry to technology to services, etc. Meanwhile, handing it over to us to fill in, to keep some of those things going. Cheap labor when it needs it, especially in the construction sector, certain industries, agriculture. So we are given the low-level industrial tasks, and we constitute consumer markets for subsidized industry and agriculture. Today, less important as a market, but that's the history of the relationship. Then you have Israeli settlement expansion, which of course puts pressure on Palestinian land and space inside Israel, in a process that began in 1948, and in the West Bank now, in a process that has kept 60% of the space reserved for Israeli settlements and allowed 850,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem to establish some 200 settlements amidst 3 million remaining Palestinians. This additional factor is, in this disruptor of markets, is the trade-off that was apparent, maybe not explicit, but to me apparent, between what I call NL and NL. So it's between the quality of life neoliberal paradigm of economic peace, which has been more or less the case in the West Bank, and in fact in Gaza, Hamas had an economic peace with Israel, but they used it differently than the Ramallah government. And the self-evident truth that there cannot be, so there's the contradiction between that and the self-evident truth that there cannot be development under occupation. We add to that the pursuit for the past 15 years, especially, of a policy package that might have been pertinent in any other developing country situation, but that, in fact, was a template derived from experience that really cannot be translated or applied in a settler colonial context. This whole process entailed the gradual forsaking of Palestinian democracy, of social rights, of individual and political freedoms, of the accountability of government, to the demands of political expedience, namely the two main movements remaining in power, and the perpetuation of Palestinian political division, which of course has been fueled since the beginning by Israeli colonial design. Palestinians hardly were able, as Professor Robinson this morning referred to build extractive institutions. I wish we had been able to get there. But we certainly were not able to create inclusive institutions. Finally, just let me briefly say about the war. From the first day, it was evident, and it was declared, and it's become played out. Anybody who doubted it in the first month has seen it by now. This is a war about making Gaza unlivable, but in fact, it's a war about making Palestine unlivable for the Palestinians. So while the Palestinian national project is today at risk, if Israel continues as it's been going, the Israeli national project has been moving freely apace in the West Bank, in Gaza Strip, and in East Jerusalem. In each area according to different designs, each at a different pace, but all aimed at making Palestine unlivable for Palestinians. This is not a war, it's not a conflict. It's a struggle for national self-determination being forcefully opposed by a settler colonial power with the active support of global powers and the collusion or impotence of regional players. The risks of this war are no less than genocidal, and the end of the Palestinian movement and dream cannot be discounted, not the people. Hence, the economic destruction and disruption is not one conducive to conventional policy action. The scale of destruction in Gaza, estimated at already above 20 billion, countless human lives lost, limbs maimed, endless trauma, communities shattered, again, alongside what is now an expanding confrontation between a racist settler vanguard and a largely unarmed Palestinian civilian population in the West Bank, being pursued by Israel with the same brutality and the same indiscriminate means as in Gaza, but on more of a localized manner, and careful not to allow an all-out war between Palestinians and settlers throughout the West Bank. Meanwhile, 350,000 Palestinians in East Jerusalem and 1.8 million inside Israel, some of whom maybe are supportive of Israel's regime, but the vast majority have shut their mouths because they don't want to be subject to the sort of police and legal repression that we're seeing. For example, Nadra Shalhoub, the professor, and others who were being repressed for very simple opinions in the only democracy in the Middle East. So sure, the two-state solution remains the only theoretically feasible option for settling this 100-year war. And certainly the Palestinian people have been committed to that path since 1988. And perhaps, as envisaged in the 1947 partition resolution of the United Nations, an equitable economic union is indeed the optimal formula for the success of such a solution. And I think that what Professor Sachs said about creating a different dynamic can create a whole different world. But with only vague international commitment to such a goal, and an Israeli government hell-bent on preventing such an outcome, I cannot say I'm optimistic. The concluding remark, if we want to gauge, how likely is it that this, as Professor Sachs said, this reckless, foolish United States administration will not realize what's going on, is the thing that I would focus on for in the coming days is the fact that the United States, the one thing that it insisted on, which was humanitarian aid coming through the land borders, and which the Israelis made some signs of adhering to, but didn't. Basically, the Americans didn't push them, and they said, okay, we're going to do our maritime corridor, and similarly, Rafah, if they have to go into Rafah, they have to go into Rafah. So that's, I was thinking there were red lines in this war, but apparently there are none. So let's hope that in the coming days we see better than we've seen for the last few months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raja. So now the floor will be given to Dr. Ziad Ahmed Bahauddin, who is a well-known Egyptian lawyer and expert on financial law, investment, company law, governance, compliance, and economic legislation. He is also a prolific writer on public development issues, and he holds several positions in boards, in various banks and investment companies and institutions. And I should also say that he was a former Deputy Prime Minister, I think, Deputy Prime Minister during the transitional government after the Egyptian Revolution. And he is also a research fellow and contributor to the ERF, and until recently he was a member of the ERF Board of Trustees. So Dr. Ziad, you have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. Thank you everyone for being here, and I'm delighted and honored to be on this panel. So let me just begin by saying that it's obviously very important to talk about peace in Palestine and in the Middle East. And that is our subject today and our interest, all of us living here in the Middle East. But there are clear to me and in my mind priorities. And I look at the fate of the Palestinian population in Gaza as one requiring a clarity of vision about those priorities. And I see four stages, if you like. Stage number one has got to be the ceasefire. And I don't think I'm saying anything new or original here, but just emphasizing that there is nothing more paramount than to reach a position of ceasefire in Gaza now, immediately, yesterday, as soon as possible. Today's news in the morning was that the toll for yesterday was 9 killed in Gaza, 13 in the West Bank, and suddenly this has made it almost ordinary news. Of course, compared to 1,000 per day a few weeks ago, but that does not in any way reduce the impact and the reality that Palestinians in Gaza, as we speak, are actually being killed, whether by bullet or by hunger or by disease or by deprivation. And therefore, as I said, either by the confrontation / skirmishes, whatever you want to call them, between Israel and Iran, nor by important diplomatic efforts. Sure, I would have been as delighted as anybody else with a resolution on Palestinian membership of the UN, but of course, nothing should distract us from the immediate ceasefire that has to be there, and therefore to put all of our effort, all of our energies, all of our moral suasion behind that immediately. The second step will have to be, and again in the same level of urgency, some system for delivering humanitarian urgent needs of the Palestinians in Gaza, of the Gaza population. That is obviously food, fuel, medicine, basic needs, shelter, and that too is something that from which we cannot be distracted and should not be subject to complicated political theorizing. So ceasefire, humanitarian aid really are things that just have to happen, and all our attention should go there. I then see possibly 2 other stages coming down the line. That would be the beginning of construction, and then at some point, the rebuilding of institutions, whether economic or political or social. And these 2 stages will be a different matter. This is where we can afford to think of what kind of future we have in mind, what kind of institutions, what kind of governance, what is the economic feasibility of construction efforts, what kind of choices are made behind those construction efforts and the rebuilding of institutions. But I think it's very important to maintain that sequential approach, because as I said, any distraction from the immediate ceasefire that is required or from the humanitarian aid, I think will be a wasted effort. Now, I've heard carefully and with a lot of interest what has been said about the two-state solution. I do not at all disagree or hesitate in putting my own opinion or weight behind the two-state solution. Now, I've heard also from Professor Sachs his skepticism, although he does support obviously the idea, and I think that's very important. But he said that the 2 Palestinian and Israeli sides are actually the less keen on it, if I understood correctly. Maha said that today, this is not a solution that is available on the ground anymore. And I, of course, trust her statistics and her opinion and judgment on this. So why are we advocating the two-state solution down the line if neither the parties are keen on it? I think for one thing, because there doesn't seem to be a better solution. I don't see, frankly, any other scenario that has more credibility or more chance of being realistic other than the two-state solution. And for that alone, I continue to think that it is probably the only path one day going forward. But more importantly, even with the alarming statistics mentioned by Maha, and even by the sense that this is not a solution that anybody on the ground believes anymore, I do believe that this is something that could be the outcome of the terrible conditions that we live in, the terrible fate that the Palestinians are facing in particular. And therefore, I'm wondering whether the skepticism or the even outright refusal of a two-state solution would come out of a sense that there is no solution, that there is right now, there's just no solution at stage where there is some construct under which a solution is being sought for the long term. I think we will come back to a two-state solution. And thirdly, because I do believe in processes, I believe that starting a process is something that it is in itself very important and can lead to changes of attitude, to changes of convictions, and to change of even reality on the ground. So I think that if we do pass stage 1 and stage 2 of ceasefire and humanitarian, and we get down to what comes later, I think that the process of thinking of a Palestinian state would be a very, not only important one, but one that would be in itself conducive to more and more change in a snowball kind of effect. And this, I think, is very crucial, including it would open up issues like political representation. Who will represent the Palestinian people once all of this is over? I think this is an important question that is obviously on everyone's mind. It will open up questions about what kind of economy can be sustained by what Dr. Khalidi described as 5 different, I can't remember the word he used, but he spoke about 5 different spheres or areas. It would raise issues about what kind of institutions that there should be for a Palestinian state, even if still in the making, what kind of legal relationships, regulatory systems, all of this will only come out of a process that has to be started somewhere. And I can't think of a better start than to come back to a two-state solution. But I also do believe that as bleak as all of this looks today, there is no denying that there is real change that has happened around the world. And it's clear in my mind that this is change that has been prompted primarily by the enormous price paid by the Palestinian people, no doubt about it. But also but also as importantly, perhaps, by the vast amount of young people, whether knowledgeable or close or related to the Palestinian issue or not, who have wholeheartedly embraced the fate and the plight of the Palestinian people, and have over the last 6 months really shown a lot of courage and a lot of determination to see things differently and to act upon it. This is change that has happened, and it's very important that we do not let the opportunity pass by without capitalizing and ensuring that the Palestinians on the ground continue to enjoy this level of support, this level of conviction by young people around the world, this level of pressure on governments around the world, because this is real change, and it's very important that it doesn't get lost in the middle of news and stories and the media pushing down the story to the 10th or 11th place on the news programs. But I want to say, and this will be my last point, that progressing in any way towards some level of, or a process that could lead to a Palestinian nation building, I think would have tremendous impact on the region as a whole. I think it would impact the people in the region. It would create an extremely powerful force for reaching some kind of peaceful solution in countries in the region that are really going through terrible times, and they're not even getting the news attention of the international support. I'm thinking of Sudan, I'm thinking of Yemen, and I think that this positive change that could happen one day with the Palestinian process beginning to go toward of change in the Arab region. It would prompt a lot of rethinking. It would prompt a lot of political realignment between forces in every country that are at each other's neck and not building a national consensus platform for advancement. It would create a spiral, I think, of positive change in the region, which frankly, without it, the region would continue to be unstable, volatile, and in a sad state. So I just want to reiterate my two main points. Extremely important in my mind to keep all attention focused and all efforts on an immediate ceasefire and beginning of humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in Gaza, and to believe that even a two-state solution right now is not what most people want, is not what looks like a good way out, but I think starting that process would be the right thing to do and would create its own dynamic, which not only would help the Palestinian people, but would actually reinforce some positive change in the whole Arab region. Thanks.
Many thanks, Dr. Ziad. Now with the floor to Professor Atif Qobrusi, who is a Professor Emeritus of Economics at McMaster University. Professor Atif is a long-standing research fellow and a major contributor to lots of research at the ERF, and more recently and currently, he's a principal investigator on a major project on climate change and micro and medium and small enterprises in the region, and he has been contributing immensely to various institutions, including the UN system, has visited many countries in the region as a member of teams from the UN system and as a consultant, and also an academic who taught for more than 40 years in various disciplines in development economics, and he's really a great asset for us here in the region. And more recently, he was unanimously elected as member of the Board of Trustees of the ERF.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brahim, for this generous introduction. I'm sure my mother would be very proud of you. It's always a treat to listen to Professor Sachs. He's unique in humanizing economics. He's a consummate humanist, and his courage and his honesty in presenting his views is noted. It's quite a mark for the dismal science. I am a bit challenged to speak last. I feel like the last husband of Elizabeth Taylor, and I feel I'm challenged to say something new, but there is really a number of issues that need to be mentioned here. First, occupation and development, occupation, human values, human dignity are irreconcilable. There is no question that you need to, there is no question that you need to liberate, to give independence to people so they can realize their potential, that they can actualize their capacities. There is no question about it that the occupation has distorted, disfigured development in Palestine, and not only in Palestine. Occupation has had very wide geographical impact. It affected the whole region, not only the Palestinians and Palestine. There isn't a single part of the Arab world, and maybe even the Muslim world and the global South, that were not affected by this dehumanization that has been played in full view of the world. It is also temporarily a very extensive one. The occupation now has lasted several decades, and developmentally has totally disfigured development, has totally reversed development processes. Economists like Sarah Young and have mentioned that the major aspect of this distortion has been de-development of Palestine. It has cast a pall all across the social, economic, political life of the region. And there is no way to understand what independence would mean, what a two-state solution would mean, unless we see to what extent it changes the parameters and the characteristics and the processes that have been ingrained in this development malaise and the distortions that we have seen them. It has narrowed the policy space. It has narrowed the options of the Palestinians. It has destroyed assets. It has drained resources. It has, in many respects, foisted uncertainties and distorted investment and thwarted the capacity of the Palestinian to utilize their resources. There's a major exodus of brains and skills. And all of these things you could lay at the ground of this occupation that has been so costly. And the story here is to what extent we can devise a two-state solution where it would be a totally different structure, a different existence, not only for the Palestinians, but for the region. And what would it take for this state to be independent and to live in dignity and equality with what is around it? I mean, if you really keep the Palestinian economy as it is today, which is literally 1/30 of the size of the Israeli economy, if the per capita income is a fraction of what the Israeli economy and the Israelis are getting, you cannot create that neighborhood where the rich and the poor coexist and where the rich have all the opportunities and the poor are denied even the semblance of a decent and acceptable life. A new state has to be sovereign. It has to be geographically integrated. It cannot be Bantustans, and it cannot be the 3 or 4 or 5 small areas. Markets have been completely severed from one another. The economic size is totally absent for any meaningful development, industrialization, or any economic activity of any sort without getting this Palestinian state to represent a contiguous state, a totally sovereign state capable of controlling all its resources, whether it's water, land, or the gas that now is on the Mediterranean. So to a great extent, yes, we want two states, but we need two states that are at least able to be on some equal footing, to be at least not with that extreme polarization where one is so rich and one is so poor, one is so free and one is so shackled. The issue of independence is to unshackle all the constraints that this occupation has exacted on the Palestinians. It's basically an act of liberation, not just purely political, but economic and social and human in many respects. And the extent to which we create a state that can live in some harmony with its neighbor, it has to have the grounds, it has to have the capacities, it has to have the potential, it has to have the resources. And one thing that I did personally, I estimated in 1948 what were the costs, what were the losses of the Palestinians. We took the UN report from the Palestinian Commission, and we digitized every single piece of property, every single deposit. And we found out that in 1980 prices, the Palestinians in 1948 lost around $300 billion. And in today's prices, at the rate of 3.5%, which is the rate of growth of Jordan, which is the neighbor of the Palestinians with very similar conditions, we're talking about 600 billion. This is the time that if we're gonna have an independent state, that independent state should have a claim on the resources that the rich country has taken it and robbed the Palestinians of it, so they can invest it and create the capacities that would make the two states on some equal footing or some less unequal footing, so that there is really an investment in peace and the creative capacity to live in harmony with one another. There is no question about it that, especially with the destruction that we have witnessed, that Dr. Maha has already shared with us, 80% of the housing, the infrastructure of Gaza has been destroyed. Dr. Raja at Mas, they have estimated the cost in billions of dollars. Today is very important juncture. We have an opportunity, we could miss it, but we have to invest in it. We have to be generous, we have to bring the resources. The world is not going to remain oblivious as it stayed. The hypocrisy that we see, that our lives, the Palestinians, have really been sacrificed without even a twist. Today we need to invest in the human dignity and in the capacities and in creating the structures, the empowerment that the Palestinian would deserve in order to exercise their freedom. I am also of the opinion that, and this may be my own personal view, that yes, maybe a two-state solution is an intermediate step. I still believe that the only way we could have peace is for a secular, democratic, equal state in which the Palestinians and the Israelis can live in harmony and equality. Without the equality in terms of freedom, but equality in terms of opportunity, it's only in this investment and empowerment that we can lay down the ground for a more stable, a more peaceful, a more prosperous peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atif, for this inspirational presentation, but also very substantive one. I would like, actually, before I give the floor to general comments, to play the role of the ERF as from a research and policy perspective. I think we were introduced to a very rich menu of ideas and concepts. And I think it is our responsibility to turn this forum and to take advantage of this opportunity to frame a strategy for policy-oriented research that perhaps maybe in a small way could contribute to the cherished goal of the two-state solution and Palestinian independence. I think both Atif, Raja, and let me try to remember Atif, Raja, and of course Maha, they all presented data and information about the burden of occupation and the impact it imposed on the Palestinian several generations since 1948 and especially since 1967. And ERF area of strengths, very particular area of strengths, is microeconomic research based on household and labor market surveys and what have you. I think it would be a great opportunity for us really to make a contribution here in terms of collecting data, systematically analyzing it, and documenting the consequences for the Palestinian people. But I think also, you know, our keynote speaker and the lead commentators, they also presented concepts, and in particular, I think about the regional, you know, payoffs of peace, and that it is a self-enlightened interest for the other countries in the region to actually promote peace and support peace, and rather than becoming oblivious to the question as we see it now. Again, research could be quite important. You know, the politics and political economy, even the macro and development economy of a peaceful solution for the region. So I would like to, you know, to kind of impose a little on the question and answers. That I don't think it would be useful for us to rehash what we have heard. I would like to invite commentators to talk specifically about what the ERF could do, if they have ideas or they have questions to Professor Sachs and the lead commentators. And I would like to start, since we are very concerned about gender equity these days in the ERF, so I would like to start with our women participants. Anyone? Shireen, I think you wanted to ask a question?
I just wanted to thank the speakers. Thank you very much for an excellent panel, and it's wonderful to hear from Professor Sachs and from all the excellent speakers. I just wanted to reiterate something that Professor Sachs said, or to maybe ask a question about it. Is it even possible, given the current situation, to hope for leadership in the US that would actually push for a two-state solution? As you mentioned, the current two candidates for president, neither one of them is likely to ever do that. So is there any hope, essentially? That's my question. Thank you.
Karim?
Since you asked us for what can ERF do, I think we could try to understand what is rational behavior beyond, you know, behind what we're saying. Why is it what we see as morally unjust, as morally undesirable, is in fact happening. And why we are trapped. There seems to be a trap ongoing since decades. Is there any kind of model that can explain that behavior? How to decipher the objective functions of various actors? I mean, put some science in what we're seeing rather than emotions, which of course I understand. And show that, demonstrate that it is not optimal, that is not desirable, and that there are better solutions, but starting from disciplines of science rather than, of course, I would say, you know, policy opinions or, you know, beliefs, which of course are most welcome, but since you ask what ERF can do, and also enlarge the dialogue. I think there are some countries that are not represented. One of the strengths of this kind of association is that it's collective, it has like-minded people. So make sure you have as much as you can around the table, including Israelis, by the way. At some point, if you want to have a discussion, they would have to be in the room. I think there are groups of people that are reasonable. So, so I would say reach out, create a platform for dialogue, and encourage and finance, support some research. That's what you can do, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah, I will continue on try to answer your question about what ERF can do. And I think ERF can do two things. One is a much detailed analysis of the costs and benefits of peace and how that would work. I mean, we can see the costs of war right now for the Palestinians. I mean, if you look at Gaza's GDP, the last quarter of 2023, it declined by 80%. At the same time, the GDP of the West Bank also contracted by 22%. But so we know those numbers, and we know the numbers, the human cost is huge. But look at the Israeli side. Israel's GDP also contracted by, I think, around 20, I have the exact number here. I think it's also around 20% in the last quarter. So there is a cost to the Israelis. I mean, because of the mobilization, you have 300,000 reservists pulled out of the labor market because of the closure of the West Bank, so that and Gaza, so that Palestinians who work there are no longer. So we see a decline in GDP in Israel. We see a decline in consumer spending by 27%. Imports fell by 42%. Exports fell by 18%. These are all numbers from the IMF for the last quarter of 2023. So one useful thing that ERF analysis can do is look at, okay, I mean, just continuing on what Karim was saying, is this sensible? Shall we continue like this for another 100 years? The other point is that ERF, which does not follow your suggestion of deep micro analysis, which is more looking at the institutional side. We have been talking about a Palestinian state. We should not be waiting for the world to recognize a Palestinian state. We should start thinking about building the institutions of a Palestinian state. And the mess we are in now is in part due to the weakness of the Palestinian Authority. I mean, the Israelis have helped, of course, by supporting Hamas and weakening the Palestinian Authority. But today, when you look, I was looking at the Arab barometer before coming to this session. 88% of Palestinians want Mahmoud Abbas to resign.
Yeah.
So we need to look at this break between Gaza and the West Bank. This has to be resolved. And we need to look about the credibility, how to build the credibility of the Palestinian leadership. Without, I mean, many of our speakers talked about lack of leadership. We at ERF, we cannot change the leadership in the United States, but maybe we can try to look at how we can strengthen and support building leaders in Palestine.
Okay, thank you. Wissam, Dr. Wissam.
Thank you. I'm very much inspired by the discussion here, and I'm thinking again about your concrete question about what ERF can do. And I have two questions maybe to suggest. I mean, I think the power of research is answering to questions that we don't know the answer to, but here, is there anything we don't know? That's the first question. And then the second point is, how are we using what we know to influence the status quo? I think the second question is really where I think we should invest our energy, about how can we use the information that we know to influence who, and which actually advocates should actually be brought on board to have the kind of conversation that is not expected, of institutions coming from this region, but to have more of discussions around, peace and security for both sides, to have discussions about the economic impact for both sides. And again, Dr. Sachs, at the beginning, he said that the three parties that actually could decide on whether or not to actually move with the two-state solution are the ones that don't have the same agenda. So as an alternative, what is an alternative is a question that I think should be asked and should be questioned.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it has been really an eye-opener for me to listen to all of the speakers, and it has been an excellent session from my point of view. And my questions are directed to Jeffrey Sachs, and he criticized the two forthcoming and the present American presidents, and he did not say anything about the people, representatives of the people in the Congress, and the views of the American people themselves. And I believe that the American bureaucracy and administration does really indeed reflect the views of the people, and these views are so much are for Israel and against Palestinians and etc. It is okay if Israel raids Iranian consulate in Syria, but it's not okay for Iran to retaliate against Israel. And that's the view of the American people and the people of the representatives in the Congress, etc. What would you like to say about that?
Thank you. Dr. Mirza. Excuse me.
Yes, thank you. The Palestinian after Oslo, it was being mandated, this Oslo came about the two-state solution. But the Palestinians really work hard, in order to build up the institution. Today, if you tell me the Palestinians, they are ready to run their own business? Yes, because they have good institutions. I agree with half of it. It needs some work out. That's one thing. When you go at the municipality level and the service delivery, the Palestinians are doing an extremely good job in the service delivery. So education, health, sanitation, waste, and infrastructure. But even they did very good in the land titling, which it was really a taboo at that area. Now there is two things, if we unleash them, and this is all the report being stating that. First of all, movement and access, releasing Area C, that's a $4 billion adding into the Palestinian economy, which has not been happened after Oslo and being promised. What is my concern now, it's about the collapse of the financial sector in Palestine. This is my concern. If this has been collapsed, honestly, that's going to be really difficult for Palestinians to move. Exactly, it's even worse than the collapse of the financial sector of Lebanon. So that's really my worry, I mean, all the banking sector, the financial, the budget, everything's now at the edge. I think this is where we need also to put some thinking about how to save the financial sector in Palestine.
Thank you. Actually, we are running really short of time.
I have one question.
I would really like to end this unless really there is a very burning question, because we have the research fellows meeting, and we wanted to give an opportunity to our...
Just 1 minute, I have a comment. Here.
Okay.
Thank you very much
Okay,
for.
you know, we give the opportunity to Rabih because he is Palestinian.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Thank you very much for this deep discussion, actually. But I didn't know from where to start. But actually, I didn't find it's a kind of logic to say that to tell both sides about the return to peace. I'm sure that Israel know very well the return of peace because they occupy the other side and they know actually what they are doing. When USA support Israel with $40 billion of weapons in 6 months, then I don't think that Israel has a problem in a financial problem of war, actually. So what we will study, what we will tell the Israelis, that if you not occupy the West Bank and Gaza, then you will have like $1 trillion return, for example, then they will stop the occupation. I think that Israel is treating the Palestinian not as an issue of money. It's an issue of, first of all, it's a religious point of view, that this land is given by God to the Israelis. So it's a religious issue. Second, it's a demographic issue. So yesterday, just the Minister of Finance in Israel legitimate 63 new settlements in West Bank. So this is, it costs more than, I think, 15 billion shekel, Israeli shekel, to support these settlements. So for Palestinians, the economic return of peace is very clear. A lot of study by World Bank and by the IAM say that, okay, the Palestinians lose more than, some studies say $15 billion, some study say $20 billion in 20 years because of not exploiting lands in Area C. But I'm not sure that we have to put this kind of balance between Palestinian and Israeli, and we have to tell both sides that if you do peace, then this is the economic profit, because Israel know very well what they are doing, and USA and the Western world know very well what they are doing in Palestine, actually. Just USA since 6 months telling the Palestinian leadership that if you keep quiet and calm in West Bank, and if you keep the situation under control, then we will confess with a Palestinian state. Just a week ago, the American government announced veto against the conference of UN and Palestinian state. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Actually, your point could be rephrased as what factors that really made the transition from secular Zionism to religious Zionism that has a very different rational framework of thinking. This could be itself a research issue that goes beyond economics, but obviously we are also trying to be a social science network as well. So I would like with this one to go back to our keynote speaker, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, for brief reactions, and then I will have to give just very few minutes each to the commentators.
Thank you very much. First, I agree with everything that everybody has said. It's a matter of putting it into a constructive response now. First, the reason actors are acting this way in Israel is that they think they can get away with it. The same with the United States. This is a matter of imposition of power, of course. The United States never has been for one moment an honest mediator. This is a US that is backing Israel to dominate the region and to dominate Palestine. This is obvious. Don't try to convince Israel that a two-state solution would be better. Don't even try to convince the US government that a two-state solution or whatever would be better. We're talking about the dynamics of power right now. So why do I have hope? I have hope because actually the entire world other than the United States, Israel, and probably Palestinian opinion are in favor of a two-state solution. I view this as the United States being the last obstacle. The United States is not all-powerful. The US government is not all-powerful. And it is not true that the American people back this current approach. The American people are not asked anything about this. This is a security state issue. It is an Israeli lobby issue. The American people, like everyone else in the world, see slaughter underway and is against the slaughter. So this is quite a narrow group that is trying to impose injustice, and right now it's resorted to genocide as a desperate action to impose injustice. China, Russia, all of the non-aligned countries in the world, that's 134, all of the BRICS countries in the world, which are bigger than the G7 in economic size right now. And much of Europe also is against this. The part of Europe that isn't is the part that is part of the US security apparatus. So we are not talking about a world opposition. And this, in my view, has nothing to do with Israel's attitudes, because Israel could not do what it does for even a day without the United States backing in armaments and in finance. And so this is a question that the world needs to express its view and not let the United States hijack the entire world. I don't think we're far from this. And I believe, for example, that China will play and should play a very significant role, just as China played a significant role in brokering a return to diplomacy of Saudi Arabia and Iran. The United States is scared of one thing in this world right now, I mean the security state, and that is China. And if China's making friends all over the world, that is the one thing that torments these fools in Washington, because they are simple-minded and they are arrogant, but they're afraid of China, and they're afraid of the fact that the whole world is against the US actions. So please don't lose hope, because we're about to have a huge vote in the General Assembly in favor of the two-state solution. We're going to go back to the Security Council. Again, it will be one US veto. I'm pretty sure they won't change their mind in an election year. But the world opinion is overwhelmingly on the side of solving this issue. And I would like to push this past the point. I'm not thinking of doing that because Biden or Trump are going to change their mind. I'm trying to help the US security apparatus, which is tough, nasty, cynical, and murderous, to understand that US isolation in the world is not to their benefit. This is about US isolation in the world, because the world actually stands for a solution right now. Now, what should that solution look like? To my mind, that's a researchable agenda. What is a viable, sovereign, economically feasible Palestinian state? Well, it should not depend on the Israeli economy. I believe that there will basically be a division between the two, not connections as there are right now, because Palestine as a low-wage dependency on Israel is hopeless. Palestine as a country in the Middle East, regardless of Israel, is perfectly feasible. What would that require? It would require a port, obviously, an independent Palestinian port in Gaza. It would require an international airport, obviously. It would require a good land connection with Jordan. It would require a road transport corridor between the West Bank and Gaza. Then Palestine can be completely independent of the Israeli economy and be a trading region in the Middle East. Even Jared Kushner, who is, I can't even use the words in polite company, he says, we'll build resorts in Gaza. Okay, let Palestine build resorts in Gaza. Anyway, I'm sorry to raise Jared Kushner. It is so revolting. But in any event, a port, an international airport, strong land connections with Jordan, a strong land bridge between Gaza and the West Bank, and basic infrastructure, desalination, a power grid, and so on. Then Gaza partial ownership of its own natural gas, after all, because that's Palestine's natural gas in Palestinian waters. That's important. The reparations that Atif mentioned can pay for a lot of the rebuilding, and this is absolutely a correct idea. So the research on a viable Palestinian state is just another economy in the Middle East with its physical infrastructure connectivity, its basic needs of power, fiber, water, sanitation, land transport, sea transport, all met, and in my view, independent of Israel to a large extent. Yes, by the way, someday, maybe Israel and Palestine will cooperate, will be peaceful, it will happen. As Deng Xiaoping wisely said about many issues, I would leave that for the next generation, not for this generation, frankly. For this generation, I'd like to see an independent, safe, sovereign Palestine that is interconnected with the regional economy and with the world economy by its own physical infrastructure, not depending on Israel. And I think that the ERF could actually help to model what a sovereign, independent Palestine would mean from an infrastructural point of view and an institutional point of view. And my view is that it would become a member of the Arab League and a member of the regional community, and it would have its natural gas deposits, and it would have its physical infrastructure, and it would be perfectly viable without having anything to do with Israel if that's the way that the two sides view things. The only thing the two sides need, in my opinion, right now is security from each other. And they don't have to like each other. I don't expect that to happen for another generation. But they can coexist side by side, as in many places in the world where neighbors don't much like each other. But Gaza is in a great, Palestine is in a great location, actually, for the Mediterranean and for connectivity and for doing business with the Gulf and for doing business throughout the world, if it has peace, security, and its own infrastructure, an airport and a physical port and a fiber connection and physical infrastructure that does not depend on Israel and does not depend on the United States, but depends on the UN Security Council, which also means China, Russia, and other major powers in the world, including the BRICS countries. And I'm very happy that Egypt also has become a BRICS nation. This is also a very positive development, not just Egypt, of course, but Egypt, Iran, and we think Saudi Arabia, although it seems ambiguous, but the BRICS can also be a very constructive force. So that is my view. We are down to Israel's backing by the US security apparatus. That's what this is about. It's brazen, it's murderous, it is opposed by the world, it is changeable, actually, by the mass opinion of the global community. And then I think ERF's work as the leading economics institution is to show the requirements of physical infrastructure, connectivity, and institutional design for that state of Palestine to be not only viable, but capable of sustainable development. Thank you.
Many thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate. So I would like now to give the floor to our commentators, starting with Dr. Maha, but brief, just 2 minutes, very telegraphic kind of closing remarks. Thank you.
Just thank you, Ibrahim, and my fellow panelists. It's been wonderful to listen to everybody. I agree with most of the comments that were made. And also in terms of the research direction that the ERF can take to contribute to perhaps finding a better or carving a path for a better future for this region. We are at a very dangerous crossroads. The lack of leadership is evident everywhere. And maybe the onus today is on research institutions like ERF, like those of us who are in the region and others to collaborate on trying to carve out some pathways for those who still believe in a peaceful and more prosperous future for this region. We're invested in it and we're here to stay. So thank you very much. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maha. And on our side also, we'd really look forward to also collaborate with the Carnegie Endowment Center. And we know that you have done commendable research on this area, on the various areas that we are talking about. So next, I would like to ask Dr. Raja. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. On the issue of research gaps, and I mean, one was mentioned, suggested, for example, the question, I mean, there are things we don't know, but there's not very much left that we don't know. I mean, there are issues that can be re-looked at. We have, the bank has, the research on the Palestinian economy is, I promise you, more than everything you'll find in your library on the rest of the Arab world. But so what we need, I think, the idea of the specific skills of this distinguished community, as well as Palestinian researchers, being more applied to gaps. I think one of those, I mean, there are gaps, and we can talk about them another time, but there are issues which nobody has really knows anything about, inequality and wealth. We don't know, and it doesn't make sense. If you go to Palestine, you will not be able to figure out what's going on, and the data only goes so far in telling you, for example. There are other issues like the issue of the cost of occupation is important. Some macro work has been done by UNCTAD, important work, by World Bank, etc. But we're trying to do some micro work now on the impact of settlements, specifically localized in different parts of the West Bank. And we have a very small amount of resources, but we're trying to come up with new, innovative ways of costing some of these things. Now, the purpose, I would say, and the third example of this issue of institutions, absolutely. As Professor Sachs mentioned, but we are working on some of these issues. We're doing work for the PLO right now that was thought up as the war began. What are the muqawwamat? What are the prerequisites of the sort of things that Atif was talking about? How do you reunify the economy? What should be the Palestinians' demands of the Israelis and the international community if a political settlement? What is the regionalism of this new Palestinian economy? What sort of open, we're talking about open regionalism, etc. What are the experiences of reconstruction of destroyed countries, cities? So these issues, we can always do with more people working on today's issues. But I would also say, finally, that that there are purposes. The purpose of this sort of work is not only, and I think it's first and foremost to be for the historical record. It has to be done, has to be documented. These things have to be not only, but these things have to also be said. And so we have to learn how to use this research to better advocate for the sort of things that we all agree are necessary. So I think that's it's a matter of not just getting ourselves in our silos and doing our research. It's a matter of thinking well in advance how this research will help create the sort of changes, transformation that we want.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raja. You has actually given us the roadmap for how we can collaborate and promote these issues and pool our competitive advantages. We do have, you know, I think significant expertise on inequality and you know, poverty and applied microeconomic research and surveys and so on. And certainly we'll have an opportunity to discuss this. So let me now ask Dr. Ziad for closing comments. Okay. Yes, thank you. I think he said, yeah, so, yeah, okay, so last but not least, Dr. Atif, yeah.
I didn't speak long, knowing that I would like to have the chance, give the chance to the audience to respond. I mean, there are three aspects I'd like to speak very quickly about and very briefly. One is that we need to integrate the disparate parts, and that there is no alternative but to build the efficient, effective infrastructure that will bring the disparate parts together and reintegrate all these bento stands that we are now experiencing. The other aspect, and it's quite important too, is that to relink to the natural depth of the Arab world and to the global south. There is a great fund of willingness on the part of the Arabs, at least the people, if not the governments, that have shown how much they support and how much they feel and how much they empathize with the Palestinians. I think there is a great goodwill here that we could tap into it and mobilize some of the resources to come. The other aspect, and maybe it's a bit controversial, but we need to talk about it. If the Israelis owe the Palestinians so much and they have built all these illegal settlements and there is going to be a chance for bringing back the right of return for the Palestinians, why don't we give some of the settlements that have really been broken into and give them so that they can bring the Palestinians in the diaspora back to their home and give them a sense that they have a right of return like the Israelis have experienced.
When we evacuate.
Thank you so much. I think with this one, I would like on behalf of all of you to really thank Professor Jeffrey Sachs and our distinguished panelists, and let us give them a big hand of applause.